manage down Delhi old no thing nigga much good ma we done it give me dead manage down where the big soul thing nigga much good abahon madul Madultinet dan gisuk keliga haluk sigu ulau si amo we a heu we yo we ha ya ya we yo he ha 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 ya we stood my we done it. Give me dead minutes, done with a big soul. Jajdo Abahon Madul Tinne Abahon Madul Tinne Dan Gisul Teliga Haluk Sigu Ulaw Sikpamo We Aheu We Yo We Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Yo He Ha Ya We Yo He Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Ha Ya We Yo He Ha Ya We Yo He Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Ha Ya He Yo We Yo We Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Yo He Ha Ya We 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 Yo He Ha Ya He Yo We Yo We Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Yo He Ha Ya We Yo He Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Ha Ya We Yo He Ha Ya We Yo He Ha Ya Ya We Yo He Ha Ya He Yo
Good afternoon. I'm going to jump right into the presentation. Can you turn that around? I've presented to 7 universities so far, and I was talking to some people at lunch hour, and I decided that, again, I have a whole bunch of notes, and again, I'm not going to, yeah, I'll use some of them. But I realized that people don't know the story of the Indian Residential School in Canada, let alone in the United States. So I'm going to put the residential school issue on in historical context so you'll understand. I'll try to make it as simple as possible, and so it'll be understandable to everybody. I was always told, if you can tell a story simply, you're a genius. In the apology, how many people have read the apology or heard it? In the apology, the Prime Minister apologized, explained why the residential schools were established by the federal government. And it was, he said, based on the assumption that Aboriginal culture and Native spiritual beliefs were inferior and unequal. And he didn't say to what, just inferior and unequal. From my perspective as a Mi'kmaq person from Nova Scotia, this is how I see it. In Debert, Nova Scotia, not far from my reserve, they dug up a habitation site that is carbon dated 10,600 years ago, before present. This is the present here. Each of these sections represents 1,000 years. And this is 1,000 years, 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, Christianity was born. 3,000, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years, 8, 9, 10,000 years. 10,600 years was how old the Mi'kmaq people were present in Nova Scotia. And our native spiritual beliefs have sustained us for 10,600 years. The Europeans, a lot of you celebrated Columbus Day. Right here, half, 500 years ago. Two of them.
Guess this is mine.
Okay, this is how long the Europeans were in Turtle Island. It's what we call North America. 500 years compared to how long we were here. All right? And I just wanted to put the Indian residential schools were established about halfway to that again in the 1700s. I think around 1780, let's say around that time. Okay, so you can see where how the Indian residential schools, when the Prime Minister apologized for the destruction of our culture, our heritage, and our traditions, you can see what he's talking about. All of that they destroyed. Okay, now to put that in perspective, okay? The Prime Minister apologized for the destruction of the culture, tradition, heritage, and language. A lot of people get them all mixed up. What's the difference between culture and tradition and heritage? Culture is all encompassing. It covers everything we do. Tradition, very simply put, is how we do it. That covers all our ceremonies, our language, our tribal law, our customs. That's our traditions. It's different than the culture. Heritage are the tangibles we inherit, our birthrights. Those are the sacred objects that you find in museums, land. Anything tangible is your heritage. And that's the difference. When he was apologizing for that, he kind of just threw everything in there, not realizing, I don't think he realized what he was apologizing for. Because when the survivors heard it, they were saying, was it for everything? Is he apologizing for just the residential school? Or is he apologizing for our loss of land and the resources? When the Prime Minister apologized to Canada, to the residential school students on behalf of Canada and all Canadians, he was addressing two major cultural groups in Canada, the Aboriginals and the non-Aboriginals. The Aboriginal people in Canada are multicultural. We are the Arctic people, the subarctic people, the northeastern forest woodland people. We are the plains people, and we are the East Coast people. And each of these regions is a separate culture. The Europeans or other Canadians that on whose behalf he was apologizing for are also multicultural. We have the Europeans, and we have the Asians, and we have the African cultures. Language, the language that you speak determines your perspective on life, your paradigm, your view of the world. And when the Prime Minister, for example, when he used the word monument, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he said, is going to be a monument to truth. And when the survivors heard it, One of the survivors said to me this, you know, on the very same day after the apology was over, I asked her, what did you think of the apology? And she said, oh, Isabelle, I'm so glad they're going to build a big monument to the survivors. And she said, I can go up there and put my mother's name on it. And I said, no, honey, that's not what he meant. And she said, oh. And then, you know, she thought, well, I don't know. I don't know what to think of the apology now. So there's how we interpreted the apology, because it was delivered in English. A lot of the survivors, their first language is Mi'kmaq, and they didn't understand it fully. Most of them said that they thought the Prime Minister was insincere. And you can understand why, because they didn't understand everything that he was saying. I didn't understand what he meant, but that Native spiritual beliefs are unequal and inferior, because I think isn't that a comparative word? You're supposed to follow it with inferior to or unequal to, and I was wondering, for a long while I struggled with that. What are we unequal to? And I don't know yet. I know, but I'm not going to say it.
Just put that on.
That we
Oh,
slide
yeah.
down.
Hold things for you.
All right.
Thank you so very much. Then they won't have to be there anymore.
All right.
Thank you.
They got me all wired up. But I wanted to, when we were having dinner today, I was surrounded with all these very knowledgeable people, but they I sensed that they didn't really, they were hungry. They were hungry for information about the residential school. We have in our culture a talking circle. And in the talking circle, we pass around the feather, and the person that's holding the feather is permitted to talk on whatever topic they want to talk about, how long they want to take, without interruption, without criticism or judgment. And we have our talking circles. The survivors, when they went to the Indian Residential School, were forbidden to speak their language. And we were forbidden to tell outsiders anything that happened inside. We were not allowed to talk about anything. And there were some pretty horrible things that happened in there. I'm not going to go into detail, but I can tell you I seen a little girl beaten to death. Those are the kinds of things that makes this story so hard for me to, it was so hard for me to write and research and collect stories, because we've only scratched the surface of the book. Out of the depths was only meant to raise consciousness, make people aware that Indian residential schools did exist and bad things happen there to Aboriginal children. If you look at the book, there's no bibliography, there's no other writing, there's no references, there's no work cited. The whole book is based on the stories of the survivors. And in this presentation and in my thesis also, I use storytelling as a teaching tool. That's all I do. I go across country and I tell stories, and that's how I teach. To bring you into this circle, I have 7 concentric circles, and central to this issue is the apology by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada. on the very same day, in the second circle, on the very same day, the three leaders of the three major political parties responded. And also, that's in the second circle, if you want, you know, this is for study purposes. They're in this second circle, and they kind of complement what the Prime Minister said. In the third circle, we have the responses by the Aboriginal leaders, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations in Canada, Phil Fontaine, and several elders, and Beverly Jacobs, the president of the Native Women's Organization of Canada. They're in this circle. In the fourth circle, we have the survivors. I went out into the communities, the 10 reserves, and I interviewed 23 survivors from the residential school, and they told their stories. They're in the fourth circle. I can't even see 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. In the fifth circle, we have the families and the communities of the survivors. They have not been researched yet. We haven't gotten that far. In the sixth one, we have non-Aboriginal people. We have the Prime Minister apologized to the survivors of residential school on behalf of Canada and all Canadians, all other Canadians. And this is in the sixth circle. I bet you're all wondering when I'm going to get to you, because you're not Canadian, eh? The outside circle is the researchers and the analysts, because this story is not going to go away. And it's global, because you know in Australia that there was an apology to the Aboriginal people there, and everyone is interested in Africa. Africa too was, they had an apology to the people. The head of state apologized to the African people in Australia and now Canada. So it's global interest and this is where you're feeling as students, as researchers, and I know you're interested because you're here. And once you get interested in this issue, it's not going to go away. You have to dig more and find out more, because culture, tradition, heritage, that covers a lot, and language, okay? And I just wanted to show you these two illustrations to draw you in. Are you interested yet? Yes. Good. Let's go. All right. All right, that's the introduction.
And to those souls who passed, whose words 'cause I feel you, yeah. I feel you, yeah. I feel and still this fire burns. There's lessons yet to be learned. Until these flames die down. Your spirit is here in our sound. And to you I call. Catch us as we fall. I feel you, yeah. I feel you, yeah.
To our elders who teach us of our creation and our past, so we may preserve Mother Earth for ancestors yet to come, we are the land.
This is dedicated to our relatives before us thousands of years ago, and to the 150 million who were exterminated across the Western Hemisphere in the first 400 years' time, starting in 1492.
To those who have kept their homelands, and to the nations extinct due to mass slaughter, slavery, deportation, and disease unknown to them, and to the ones who are subjected to the same treatment today.
To the ones who survived the relocations and the ones who died along the way. To those who carried on traditions and lived strong among their people. To those who left their communities by force or by choice and through generations no longer know who they are.
To those who search and never find, to those that turn away the so-called non-accepted, to those that bring us together, and to those living outside keeping touch, the voice for many.
To those that make it back to live and fight the struggles of their people, to those that give up and those who do not care, to those who abuse themselves and others, and those who revive again, to those who are physically, mentally, or spiritually incapable by accident or by birth.
To those who seek strength in our spirituality and ways of life, and those who exploit it, even our own. To those who fall for the lies and join the dividing lines that keep us fighting amongst each other.
To the outsiders who step in, good or bad, and those of us who don't know better. To the leaders and prisoners of war, politics, crime, race, and religion, innocent or guilty.
To the young, the old, the living, and the dead, to our brothers and sisters and all living things across Mother Earth,
and her beauty we've destroyed and denied the honor that the Creator has given each individual.
The truth that lies in our hearts, all my relations.
Igo igande Igo igande Igo igande Igo gando dajne Igo igande Igo gando daye Igo igande Igo igande Igo igande Igo gando dajne Igo igande Igo gando daye Igo igande Igo igande Igo igande Igo gando dajne Igo igande Igo gando daye Igo igande Igo igande Igo igande Igo gando dajne Igo igande Igo gando daye Igo igande gando dajne
O Canada, Maqmikewe'skw, en when get you doch dan tuju, sach gesalulek megide dulek kisne kaukelnie Dante siek o Canada akwe ulekisa God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
The Indian Residential School was opened for the first time in 1929. And it was only for teenage boys. They were going to teach them farming and manual skills. But the teenage boys didn't want to stay in the school, so they kept running away. And so that program failed. It was under the supervision of Father Jeremiah Mackey, Roman Catholic priest. In 1930, September, it reopened. And this time, it admitted children ages ranging in age from 7 to 16. In 1934, two of the boys that were at the school ran away and reported to the Indian agent that Father Mackey had horsewhipped them. And they showed the scars on their backs. The Indian agent took Father Mackey to court, and Father Mackey was exonerated. That set the legal precedent for physical abuse of children in residential schools. My father, when I was researching the book for Out of the Depths, I found a paper that was signed by my father, and it was dated August 1936. And on the paper was written by the Indian agent and signed by my father, saying that my father was too sick to look after me, and asking for permission if I could attend the Indian Residential School. I was 4.5. I went to my sister and I showed her this note, and she said, "Oh yeah." She said, "I remember that." She was 7, and my mother didn't want to send her to the Indian Residential School by herself, and that's why my father agreed to sign that paper to let me go, because my mother didn't want to separate her daughters. She wanted to keep us together. So my sister, 7 years old, became my surrogate mother for 10 years. On the first night, I got lonesome for my brothers. I had 2 brothers also going to the residential school. And my sister said, "Well, they're in this building." And she said, "If you look out the window, you can see where they're sleeping." And so we opened the window, and I went over and I looked out the door and at the window, and all I could see was the windows in on the building. I said, I can't see them. So she pushed me out farther. I was sticking out about this much. So she pushed me out a little farther, and I was sticking out a little bit more. Hanging on with one hand, trying to see my brothers. And she said, "Do you see them? Do you see that window yet? Do you see that window yet?" I said, "No." And so she pushed me out some more. And she was hanging on to me by my ankles. And I could feel I had on a nightgown, and I could feel I was coming out of it. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to fall." So she dragged me back in by the ankles. That was the first night we were there. We were not allowed to talk to our brothers. And we were silenced on that first day. You can't talk your language, you can't talk Mi'kmaq, and you don't understand English. And if you say something English, you better not have an accent, because you'll get beaten. So for a long while I didn't talk. And for a long while, the survivors didn't talk. The code of silence was imposed on us at a very young age. And I see many severe beatings that I don't want to go into right now. So when I went away, I left the reserve, and 20 years later I came back in 1985. I had great intentions. I was going to write a book on Native women, women's rights. And I started it. I looked up on the hill and the school was still standing. And I thought the nuns were still there looking out the window. I was scared to get out of my car. I was 46 years old and I was still scared of the nuns. So I took a picture of the school from inside my car. And it haunted me. I had to go back. I went back a couple of days later. I went a little closer. Every day I would go a little closer. There was a big sign there that enter at your own risk, right? I went right up there. I stopped off and I got a friend and I said, I want to go to the Shubi school and I want to take pictures of every room. And he said, I'm not going to be responsible for your safety. I'll take you as far as the door. But we got inside, we went inside, and one of the rooms I wanted to see was the room that they call the dungeon. And they used to put runaway boys in that dungeon. It had no windows. And I wanted to see what it was like in there. So that's what motivated me. Like, where's that dungeon that I was so afraid of when I was a little girl? I had to see it again. And from there on, I took pictures of every room, and I used to go to powwows, and everywhere that Native people gathered, I would bring those pictures with me. And I would spread them out on the table or on the floor, everywhere. And people used to come, and they would look at the pictures, and they would say, I remember what happened in this room. And one of the first rooms that they pointed out to me, I remember it so clearly, was the toilets. They had stalls, We had stalls, and at the end of the first stall, there was a big water tank. And in order to flush the toilets, you had to pull this cord, and it would flush all the toilets, right? And she said, I remember that stall. The nun tried to flush a little girl down the toilet, and she would pull on this string, and all you would see was 2 arms and 2 legs, and she would push her down and pull the water string. I wasn't ready to hear that because I hadn't seen that when I was there, but I believed her because I seen awful things anyway, and people would come and they would tell me, oh, I remember what happened in that room, what happened in this room. And I got the idea that maybe one of the former students will let me tape her story. So I asked one of them, and she said, yeah. I said, I'll take the story, and I'll keep a copy, and I'll give you a copy, and this will be your biography. You show it to your children and your grandchildren. And so that's what I did. About a month later, another woman. Will you let me tape your story? She said yes. Did the same thing, gave her a copy and kept the copy. And then the stories kept accumulating, and so did the pain. And I thought, I'm hurting these people. I'm hurting these survivors. They've been hurt already, and I'm opening up these wounds. But they wanted their stories told. So what I used to do, I got a tape recorder, and I put the tape recorder in, and I would go to them, and I would say, "There's the pause button. Talk until you can't talk some more, no more. And if the story gets too painful for you, you press that pause button, and I'll wait." And that's what happened. I'd go to their homes, and they would tell the story until they couldn't talk no more, and then they would press the pause button, and we would wait until that anxiety attack passed, and then they would continue their story. A couple times I felt that the person that I had interviewed was going to commit suicide, and I stayed all night with that person until their family came home. And that's how Out of the Depths was born, from those stories. I went back to university, and that's when I, as a student, I wrote Out of the Depths. It was published in 1992. I think I was about 59 years old. I'm 79 now, and the apology came out in 2008. And at first, for myself, I accepted the apology as soon as I read it or heard it on the big screen. And I'll tell you why. When I was a little girl, before I went to the residential school, my mother used to take us around everywhere. And I remember that at one time we were sitting at a table. It was a picnic table. I think there was some kind of festival going on. And at the center of sitting in the chair was a little old lady. I was about 4 years old, and she was smaller than I was. She was wrapped up in a blanket, and she was really, really old. Oh, really old, tiny. She was tiny. And nobody was talking, but we were just like comfortable, and there was like probably her daughter was sitting next to her, but there were women all surrounded, and my mother was sitting like on the edge, and I was on the floor. I was on the ground, because she used to say, sit right there and listen. And that's how I learned about life, through storytelling. So I would listen to all these stories, and I don't know what we were there for, but this car pulled up. It was 1930s, right? This car pulled up, and there were two men in it. And one man got out of the driver's seat, and he had a felt hat in his hand. And nobody spoke, nobody said anything. And he stood there, and he looked up at grandmother, and he walked over to her and stood in front of her, and stood there for a long while. And then he approached her and kissed her on both cheeks and called her Ntsugwi. And I was waiting for them to say something, but nobody said anything, and I don't remember what happened after that. But that's what flashed in my mind when Stephen Harper said, "I stand before you today." I got that flashback of when that man stood in front of grandmother. And I had a blue scarf, and I was standing on a chair in the back of the room because I couldn't see. I'm so short, eh? I couldn't see over the head, so I put my chair up against the wall, and I stood on it. And when he said, "I apologize to the survivors of the Indian Residential School," I took off my blue scarf, and I waved it, and I said, "Hey!" I was the only one. I was the only one in that room that said anything, and I thought to myself, what's wrong with these people? The Prime Minister, the most powerful man in Canada, apologized to us. And then Prime Minister continued to apologize some more for other things. And this time, I just went all by myself in back room. I was so happy. I felt so good because I felt now I'm turning a new page. And on this page, I'm going to write pride. And in my mind, I could see this new page, blank, pride. And that's how I felt that day. After the apology was over, people were filing past me. And I was asking them, what did you think about the apology? And they were saying, he was insincere. A lot of them were saying that he didn't sign the Charter of Indigenous Rights. Someone was, the woman I told you about the monument, she was so happy she thought they were going to build a monument to residential school survivors. And then when I told her, no, that's not what they're going to do, I felt bad because she was so happy and I made her sad. The survivors of Indian residential schools are all at different levels in their lives. We weren't all there at the same time. And we're all at different stages in our lives. Some of us have never told our stories. A lot of us have been going to healing circles over last 20 years and still not healed. When researching Indian residential school survivors, I have to remember that they're a vulnerable group that suffered trauma in their childhoods, and as adults, they're still dealing with unresolved anger and frustration, and a lot of them, when they came, they were taken away as little children. We were taken away as little children. And when we were discharged at 16 and 17, we did not understand our language anymore. So we were going home, we didn't fit in a tribal society. The definition of a tribal society is that you have common ancestors, you speak a common language, and you live in a common region, area. They took that part of us that defines us as tribal people, and they destroyed it. They destroyed our spiritual belief system, our philosophy, our language, our outlook on life, and they changed us into different people, trying to make us white. And today, we're still trying to define ourselves in many ways. How am I for time? Because I want to leave time for questions.
It's 12:50.
Huh?
It's 10 minutes before 1 o'clock.
Question. Your turn.
When did you see your parents? When you were in the school?
I was very lucky. My parents we only lived about 7 miles from the residential school. And the part that I didn't tell you about my dad was that when he heard that Father Mackey was exonerated for child abuse, in tribal law, child abuse is punishable by, I don't know. Anyway, they had a council meeting at my father's house, and they were going to, they had to decide who was going to assassinate Father Mackey, according to tribal law. And as it turned out, they decided not to because the children were locked in the dormitories at night, and they thought if anybody assassinated Father Mackey, they would kill all the children at the residential school. So they
Did you have summers off?
yes, we did, but a lot of the children were orphans, and they had no place to go, and when they went to the school, they were 5, 6, or 7 years old, and when they were discharged, they were 16. And there are stories that the priest just put them on the train, gave them a name tag, and told them your reserve is Yarmouth. You're going to Yarmouth. Even though their parents had died, they had no homes. They didn't know where home was.
Do you think the response might have been different if it had been a different prime minister in a different generation or a different individual delivering the apology?
In our language, there is no word for apology. We just have a big siktuagan. A big siktuagan is a forgiveness ceremony where the perpetrator and the victim come together and they forgive each other. Sometimes it's the victim that initiates the big siktuagan ceremony. And so we couldn't relate to it at all. A lot of the survivors said it didn't have to be the Prime Minister. It could have been anyone. What about the Governor General? Could have been her. It probably would be more acceptable to Native people because she's a woman of color and they could relate to her. It didn't have to be the Prime Minister. It could have been the Pope. Fat chance.
Has any U.S. president apologized for the American residential
yes,
schools?
President Obama did make a statement to the Native Americans, didn't he, when he became president? Yeah. And that's another thing that the survivors were saying, that you know how Obama works the crowds, eh? He holds it out in the open, and if you compare that to how the apology was delivered in a little room, House of Commons, and, you know, with just the big shots there, you know, it didn't have to be like that. It could have been more humane. If people, he could have, the Prime Minister or whoever apologized could have mingled with the crowd, with the survivors, shook their hands. A lot of them were saying, you know, I would like to have someone shake my hand and look me in the eye and say, I'm sorry, you know. But it didn't happen either.
You know, mealtime is pretty important to people because people have to eat. So do you have any memories of mealtime in the residential school?
Not a good one. Not a good one. There was a little girl, well, I was a little girl too. We all used to sit at long tables, eh? And she didn't like greens, and I liked greens, eh? And she said to me, you want my greens? And I said, yeah, but not now because the nun is watching. And so we continued to eat, and she says to me, do you want them now? I said, no, the nun is still watching. Finally, we're coming to the end of the meal. All our plates were empty except hers. She couldn't eat her greens. So she picked them, took the greens off the table, and put them in her pocket like this. And the nun saw that movement. And they used to wear big beads around their waist. She took her beads off so the little girl won't hear her. And she came up behind Nancy, and she grabbed her on the back of her head. And I was sitting right opposite Nancy. Nancy, when her head went back, she looked at me like in surprise. Like, why didn't you tell me? That's what I imagined she was saying. You know, the nun had her hair. And the reason why I didn't tell her, well, I was scared. I thought I was going to get a toe. I would have. I know how they act. Anyway, she forced those greens down Nancy's throat. I think the story's in the book. And beat her. Made her eat her vomit and beat her. By the end of the meal, they had to take this little girl out because they had to lead her out. They were dragging her out, actually. And we never saw the little girl again. That summer when we went home for vacation, my mother says to me, "Do you know Nancy Lampquin?" And we said, "Yeah." The nun made her eat her vomit. And she said, "Well, she's buried up here on the reserve." And my sister and I looked at each other and we thought, where did that little, what happened? We couldn't piece together. All we remembered was the beating, and they're taking the little girl out. And then we go home and my mother tells us that she's dead. We went out to see the grave site, and the nun killed her. That was our meal time. Every day there was somebody getting beaten. Every day. They used meal as a political tool. They used it to teach racism. Racism was everywhere, in the books, in the church, in school, in the play yard, at meals. It was everywhere.
In her introduction, generational pain and stories being passed down and that pain going from one generation to another. And you also said that a lot of the survivors didn't tell their stories or didn't speak until you spoke to them. I'm just kind of wondering what was communicated to children and grandchildren?
What was what?
What was communicated to children and grandchildren in terms of your stories? Did you talk to your own families about your experiences?
A lot of survivors do. And a lot of survivors don't talk to anybody, not to their families. Especially, they're trying to protect their children by not telling the horrible stories. You don't tell your children horrible stories, do you? We don't either. We'll tell everybody else, but not the children.
The sleeping conditions of the schools, like how were the beds and the bedrooms and everything? Were they like clean? Did they provide you with like enough blankets? I mean, it's Canada, so
yeah,
it gets pretty cold.
We all slept in dormitories in rows, and we kept the dormitories. We were the housekeepers ourselves, but it was always so cold. You know, and a lot of children used to wet the bed because my mother said because they got cold. They had cold in their kidneys. They had been provided with warm blankets, you know, and besides, you weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. Nothing was comfortable there at all.
Did every single child get beaten at some point?
I'm sure of it because they used to lie. If one person did something, like one time someone took some potato peelings and flushed them down the toilet, and the toilet didn't flush, and the nun found the potato peelings and stood everybody in line. And nobody would tell on anyone else, so they stood everybody in line, beat everybody. There, they got their, whoever was the wrongdoer, that's the way they looked at it. You'll all get it. They were trying to break up our tribal connections, our spirit. They were trying to kill the Indian in the child. That was their goal. And in some cases, they succeeded, but not me.
Were there any sympathetic teachers that one could go to, or that expressed sympathy for your plight?
If they did, they didn't speak up. They remained silent. And you know that silence is the victim, the perpetrators depend on the silence of their victims. And that's the first thing you do to your victim. You silence them, you isolate them, which is what happened to us. No. Okay, that's it. I hope.
They scrubbed our skin with a wire brush. They broke the boundaries of all trust. Forget the language our parents taught us, 'cause when they're done, you won't recognize yourself. They cut our hair, they scarred our skin. They tried to break the child within. They cut our hair, they scarred our skin. Our hearts, they ached with pain so hard to bear, as we longed for our parents' loving care. No love was shown, no kindness there, only unearned shame and great tears of fear. Way highway, hey ya, way hey ya, hey yo. Way highway, hey ya, way hey ya, hey yo. Hardwood floors laid throughout this place. The workers here, oh, what a disgrace. They were attempting to wipe our whole race. Feelings of anger, grief, and shame. They cut our hair, they scarred our skin. They tried to break the child within. Yeah, they cut our hair, they scarred our skin. Yeah. Our hearts, they ached with pain so hard to bear, as we long when grief reveals a hidden past. Buried truth revealed at